Namaskar, very good afternoon. I, Dr. Renu Tomar, welcome you discussing about philosophy and education. Friends, we were talking about philosophy and education, and we were talking about the different aspects of philosophy. We were talking about the normative premises which are important as to understand that what kind of role education should be playing in the world at large. When we were talking about normative premises, we were talking about that normative premises are generally about what is good or right, basic factual premises about humanity and the world at large. So, based upon these premises and disposition, the philosophers come out with the goals of education. As to understand it further, we have to relate it with the psychology of learning and the method of teaching. If you remember whatever you have read or studied in the psychology of learning and the methods of teaching, you will be understanding it properly. Try to revert back to your knowledge of that context, and you will understand that when we talk about psychology of learning and we talked about methods of teaching, we were basically dependent upon what kind of philosophy that particular subject has. And when we talked about the philosophy of the subject, that was usually normative aspect of the philosophy, that is normative philosophy. And we were also concerned about when we talk about the methods of teaching, we were talking about not just normative aspect of the subject, but also we were talking about the ethics side of the society. Then we were discussing in the last lecture also about it, that when we talk about ethics, that means what should the education be doing as far as society is concerned. So, how it should be working as an agent. The education should be working as an agent of society and providing it the kind of expectations it has. To understand it further, let us take example of Aristotle. Aristotle argued that good equal happiness equal excellent activity. This was something which he believed. That means individual should be promoted on two aspects, two kind of excellent activity. One is intellectual, which he classified as like doing geometry, and other is moral, that is doing just action. So, according to Aristotle, if we understand the normative theory of education from the perspective of Aristotle, it means that education should be concerned about individual having the doing geometry for the intellectual perspective and doing just action on the moral aspect. So, therefore, everyone who is capable of these types of excellent activity should be acquiring the knowledge of geometry and disposition to be just, and this should be the role of the school. And knowledge of geometry can be acquired by instruction, and a disposition to be just by practice. Disposition to be just, as we said, the disposition is to be acquired by practice. So, here we understand what has Aristotle done. Aristotle has given the two aims of education. Aristotle has also given how those aims are to be achieved, that is pedagogy also. Like when he talks about geometry, he said it is to be acquired by instruction, and when he talked about getting the disposition to be just, then he said that is to be acquired by practices, by doing just action, and the young should be given instructions in geometry and practice in doing just action. So, philosophy may it be analytical, speculative, narrative, it remembers. We should remember that it's normally going on in a society in which there already is educational system. This is an important aspect, that in the society which doesn't have an educational system, we cannot have philosophy functioning in the way as we are studying. So, we cannot have the educational philosophy at all. So, in the first place, philosophy may turn its attention to the education, thus generating philosophy of education proper and becoming part of the discipline of education as it has become as a foundation of education. Secondly, in a society in which there is a single system of education governed by single prevailing theory of education, philosopher has to do One, he has to analyze the concept and reason used in connection with education in order to make philosophical thinking about it as clear, explicit and logical as possible. Then he may also seek to support the prevailing system by providing more philosophical argument for disposition aimed at and the methods used. He may also criticize the system, the existing system, and seek to reform it in the light of some more philosophical theory of education he has arrived at. That means that he may also be giving his own theory, or oblique and he may simply teach logic and philosophy to future educators and parents in the hope that they will apply them to the educational matters. So, from here on, what we understand it, that philosopher can play multiple of roles. Here we talk about 4 roles which philosophers can be playing in the education system. Then when we talk about the pluralistic society, now let us take example, when we talk about pluralistic society, then we can have India or United States, in which we do have education enterprise which is existing, and a large segment of it is based upon the working compromising between the conflicting views. So, here a philosopher may again do several sorts of job. He may do any of the things mentioned above, like which we have discussed right now, and finally in the society which is broken down by some kind of revolution, has new segment which has emerged from colonialism. Here we can take our own example, India after we were through with the colonialism. Then the role of a philosopher may even be supply a new full-fledged normative philosophy for its educational system. In India, in fact, what we did was we revamped the education system which was handed over by the English to us, rather than relooking it, totally changing it, as was done by in the Russian society. Let us take example of Karl Marx. What Karl Marx did to Russia and China, he completely, because of the revolution which had come up, he assumed a role of supplying a new normative philosophy, a completely full-fledged normative philosophy, a complete new ideology which guided not just the revolution in the first place, but also provided a new kind of education system to them. And in fact, when we talk about Karl Marx, let us remember that the Indian education system was not impacted so much by the Karl Marx, but Indian independence fight for independence was very much influenced by the Karl Marx. Now let us take example of the Plato. What did Plato do? Plato tried to do to the Syracuse the same kind of thing as the Karl Marx did to the Russia, and as a philosopher the similar thing was done to the France. If you remember, when the France had a revolution in it, and usually it is called the kind of a revolution the France had, the complete system was changed. And when we talked about the school, they even dared to build a new society. They asked school to build a new society. So, this is how the educationists or the philosophers have played an important role in reviving the new kind of societies. When did they play such a role? Not in a settled society. We talked about the 3 kind of society. We talked about the pluralistic society. We talked about the society which was destroyed or was just coming up after colonialism was through. So, it was in a kind of a broken down stage. In that society, the philosophers played a different kind of role. In the pluralistic societies, the philosopher played different kind of role, and in the single prevailing way, the society in which was being governed by the single system of education, in that the philosophers played a different kind of role. And in fact, when we talked about the kind of a role they played, they were also, the similar kind of role were also played in the pluralistic society, the society in which the single system of education was there. The kind of a role the philosopher has, like he worked as a critic, and the same kind of a role is played by the philosopher in the pluralistic society also, and the same kind of a role is played in the society which has come out after the revolution, which is in the broken down stage. In that also philosopher work as a critic, because there they dare the society to build a new type of school, and they dare the school to build a new kind of society. So, let us try to understand Plato's further. As far as the Plato is concerned, Plato's educational philosophy was grounded in a vision of an ideal republic. Those of you who have studied republic, you must be able to correlate how Plato has given his vision in the republic. It is not the education system, it is the complete social system which he has talked about. In his social system, the individuals are to serve the nation. They are best served by being subordinated to the just society, and that society is different. What kind of society is it? When we talk about Plato, we have to understand that he was basically talking about mind and body. They are considered as a separate entities by him. When let us take example of another text of his. In the dialogue of Phaedo, written in middle period, Plato expressed his distinctive view about the nature of knowledge, reality and soul. When the soul and body are united, then the nature orders the soul to rule and govern and body to obey and serve. Now, which of these two functions is akin to the divine and which is to the mortal? Does not the divine appear to be that which naturally occurs and rules, and the mortal to be the one which is subject and the servant? So, on this premises, Plato advocated removing children from their mother's care and raising them as a wards of state, with great care being taken to differentiate children suitable to various castes, the highest receiving the most education, so that they could act as a guardian of the city and care for the less able. So, in fact, Plato did not advocate of a system which was at equal level or which was fair. He did not understand the fairness of any system. In fact, for him, education to be holistic, to be skill oriented, it was a physical discipline, and as far as the music and art were the highest form of endeavor which he considered. So, education as a tool meant it was a tool in the hand of a state, one thing. The children were the responsibility of the state, second thing. They were to be taken away from their parents, thirdly. Fourthly, they were to be differentiated on the aspect that what kind of genes they have inherited. So, on that basis, the children were to be provided the care. So, most efficient one to be cared more, and the less efficient were to be cared less. So, friends, from here what we conceive is that the Plato was very unfair, and if we look at his theory, then we will understand that that Plato was not being fair to the children. In fact, he found that in children were governed by talent was distributed non-genetically, and thus he found in the children born in the social class. He believed that, but he built on this by insisting that those suitably gifted were to be trained by the state, so they might be qualified to assume the rule of a ruling class. What they established was essentially a system of selective public education premised on the assumption that an educated minority of the population were, by the virtue of their education and inborn educability, sufficient for healthy governance. Plato's writings contain some of the following ideas, like elementary education would be confined to the guardian class till the age of 18, followed by 2 years of compulsory military training, and then by higher education for those who qualified. While elementary education made the soul responsive to the environment, and higher education helped the soul to search for truth which illuminated it. Both boys and girls received the same kind of education. Elementary education consisted of music and gymnastics, designed to train and blend gentle and fierce qualities in the individual and create a harmonious person. At the age of 20, a selection was to be made, and the best students would be taken as on an advanced course in mathematics, geometry, astronomy, harmonics, and the first course in the scheme of higher education would last for 10 years. It would be those who had flair for science. At the age of 30, there would be another selection. Those who were qualified would study dialectics, metaphysics, logic and philosophy for the next 5 years. After accepting junior position in the army for 15 years, a man would have completed his theoretical and practical education by the age of 50. So, this is how the Plato conceived the education system. Now, let us talk about the DV. DV assumed that education is the process of forming the fundamental dispositions towards nature and our fellow human beings. Philosophy is defined as the most general theory of education by the Dewey. So, here Dewey was thinking that philosophy is the most general normative theory of education, and what he said is true, as it means that the philosophy has to be understood in its widest sense, includes theology and poetry as well as philosophy properly in what tells us as to what is to be believed, how to feel about humanity and the universe. So, philosophies of education have traveled down a tree of branches, we can say. The first four support the branch of philosophy are the idealistic school, the realistic school, the pragmatist, the existentialist. We shall be talking about all. Well, first let us complete with the Dewey. When we talk about Dewey in 1986, he opened the laboratory school at the University of Chicago in an institutional efforts to pursue together rather than becoming part of utility and culture absorption and expression theory and practice, which according to him were its indispensable elements to any educational scheme. So, as the unified head of the Department of Philosophy, Psychology and Pedagogy, John Dewey articulated a desire to organize an educational experience where children could be more creative than the best of progressive model of the day. So, transactionalism as a pragmatic philosophy grew out of the work he did in the laboratory school. The two influenced the influential work which stemmed out from the research were that The Child and the Curriculum and Democracy of Education. These are the two books which researches which he has written. One is The Child and the Curriculum, which was written in 1902, and Democracy of Education, which came out in 1916. So, most of the Dewey's understanding of education is from these two research books which he has written. Dewey wrote of the dualism that plagued education philosophy. In the later book, instead of seeing the education process steadily and as a whole, he sees it as a conflicting term. We, as far as he is concerned, he says we get the case of a child versus curriculum and the individual versus social culture. So, transactionalism as a pragmatic philosophy grew out of the work which he did in the laboratory. So, Dewey found that the preoccupation which facts as a knowledge in the educative process leads student to memorize, ill understand rules and principle, and second hand knowledge which is learnt in mere word is beginning in the study. Mere word can never replace the ability to organize knowledge into both useful and valuable experience. So, this was his perception that the education system of his scenario was failing because it was not preparing students. It was not giving them ability to organize knowledge into the useful and valuable experience. That is why he came out with this theory, and we should be discussing all the theories in detail. First of all, let us talk about idealism. What is idealism? Idealism focuses on subject matter curriculum. It emphasizes the great idea of the culture. In the words of Ornstein, we can understand it ponder ideas to make them whole. So, as far as idealism is concerned, idealism is about the great ideas of the culture and how it has to be impacted upon. And what about realism? Realism means a subject matter curriculum stressing objective knowledge and values. Reality is objective, meaning everyone should be obtain the same result regardless of what he does or how he considers concepts. Now, briefly we are discussing all the concepts. We shall be detailing this concept in the forthcoming lectures also. Now, let us talk about perennialism. What is perennialism? Perennialism focuses on human concern that has caused the concern for the centuries. That means it will be talking about what is concern of the human, and accordingly the education system has to be fostered. Now, let us talk about essentialism. What is essentialism? It is rooted partially in the idealism. It emphasizes skills and subjects. It demonstrates the cultural heritage and contribute to the society. Progressivism is also another ism. Progressivism. See, I am also learning with you. Now, instruct about the features, about the problem solving, about the group activities, and as far as instructor is concerned, as far as progressivism is concerned, instructor act as a facilitator as opposed to the leader. So, this is progressivism is basically about the role of a teacher. Here the role of the teacher has changed from a leader to the facilitator. Then there is social reconstructionism. Social reconstructionists nowadays are treated as very important, and they have played an important role because they talked about the education being reconstructed. And when we talk about social reconstructionist, then we have to understand the American system, because American system had a huge impact of the social reconstructionist. Here the instruction has to focus on the significant social and economic problem in an effort to solve them. Then there is another ism which is very important, that is existentialism. Existentialism means it stimulates awareness which each person creates, and that awareness is discussed, and after it is discussed, it is encouraged with the deep personal reflection on the part of the students, on the part of the teacher. Then there is perennialism. Perennialists are the instructors who feel that the knowledge that has been passed through the ages should be continued as a basis of the curriculum, like the classic work of the Plato and Einstein. Perennialists base their teaching on the reason, logic and analytical thought, and they understand that the information that stood the test of time is only relevant, and they do not elicit students' input. The classes most likely to be considered under the approach would be history, science, maths, religion, and these will be covered in the perennialism. Now we have to discuss another ism which is very important, positivism. What is positivism? Here the instructor whose teaching and philosophies are based upon the documented facts and tangible truth are normally those who would be in the maths and science department. So these are the teachers who do not feel that the religion and the supernatural should be the part of the thinking process. So idea of uncertainty and unknown is considered illogical as far as the positivism is concerned. Then these teachers do not feel the religion and supernatural should be part of the thinking process. Then there is behaviorism. As we know that behaviorists believe in rewards and punishment as an approach to controlling the teaching environment due to their belief in the intrinsic nature of human to react to the internal and external stimuli. Here the teacher-centered system ultimately allows the student to be controlled by the educator, who makes the environment pleasant or unpleasant depending upon the student's behavior. Then there is essentialism. Essentialists believe that there is a universal pool of knowledge needed by all students. The fundamental of teaching are the basis of the curriculum. Math, science, history, foreign language and English. Vocational classes are not seen as a necessary part of the educational training. So these are the subjects which are important for the essentialist. So from the essentialist perspective, the curriculum should have math, science, history, foreign language and English. As far as the classroom are concerned, in their case the classrooms are formal, teacher centered and students are passive learners, and evaluation is predominantly through testing, and project methods or portfolios are restricted. So these instructors usually accept that no child left behind act, because test scores are the main form of evaluation. When we talk about progressivism, we understand it is student centered, and here the students follow the scientific method of questioning and searching. So if we understand progressivism, it is in fact opposite to essentialism. Here the student is at the center, and the evaluation includes project and portfolios, and the current events are used to keep the students interested in the required subject matters. Students are active learners, are opposed to the passive learners, and the teacher is a facilitator rather than center of the educational process, and the student input is encouraged. Students are asked to find their interpretation of their answers. When we talk about reconstructionism, here the student centered this is also student centered philosophy, which strive to instill a desire to make the world for a better place. When they desire a world to become a better place, it places a focus on the controversial world issues and uses current events as a springboard for the thinking process. Here the students are taught the importance of working together to bring about the change. These teachers incorporate what is happening in the world with what they are learning in the classroom. And as far as constructionism is concerned, constructivism, here the active participation is the key to this teaching line. teaching method. Here the students are free to explore their own ideas, share concepts with one another in a non-traditional method. Hand-on activity is the most effective way of learning and is considered true learning. Now let us talk about existentialism, which is also quite important because it is again a student-centered philosophy. Here the education method is based upon the idea that student shall be presented with choice about the learning process, and student is to be engaged in all the aspects of learning and working together with the teacher and her peer to develop a curriculum and evaluation system that allows for individual interest and abilities. Here as far as philosophy of education is concerned, what we understand is the philosophy of education is what you believe about education and the way children learn. So it is about the belief. Now let us talk about that how constructivist or existentialist have played an important role as far as education is concerned. As far as constructivist is concerned, they, as a school of philosophy, it is rooted in pragmatic pedagogy, and it basically is it has another branch which is social reconstructivist. It has gained more popularity, reason being particularly in the turn of the century, that is in early 90s. The reason was that many teachers felt the rote memorization and mindless routine which was common was ineffective and began to look for alternate ways to reach their students. Through the constructivist approach, students construct knowledge through an interaction between what they already think and know with new idea and experience. How is it different from existentialism? To understand it, we have to understand existentialism. Existentialism means childhood is not adulthood. Here the childhood is playing and no child ever get enough play. So as far as existentialism is concerned, they understand that man is nothing else but he makes of himself. So such is the first principle of existentialism. As we know that the existentialism was promoted and propagated by Jean-Paul Sartre. Existentialism is a philosophical term, and existentialist movement in education is based upon the intellectual attitude that philosophers learn from the existentialism. As far as Europe is concerned, we have to understand that Kierkegaard played and Nietzsche played an important role, and they did not believe in beliefs. They did not have faith in God. So the famous existentialists passionately disagree with one another on one basic philosophical issue which they shared was respect for individualism. So in particular, they argued that the traditional approach to philosophy do not adequately respect the unique concern of each individual. To understand it further, let us take example of how Sartre saw existentialism. For him, it means that there exists no universe inborn human nature. We are born and exist, and then we ourselves freely determine our essence, and that is determined by our innermost nature. So from that perspective, what kind of a role would existentialism give to the education? So as its name gives, it strongly rejects the traditional philosophy. It rejects the kind of instructions which are given in the education system, and it says that the individual are responsible for determining for themselves what is true or false, right or wrong, beautiful or ugly. So here the role of the education system or the classroom will be not to give the instructions, rather the subject matter will take the second place to help the students understand and appreciate themselves as a unique individual who accept complete responsibility for their thoughts, feeling and action. So that is why we said that when we talk about existentialists, they believe that students should have a role in deciding almost everything, which includes curriculum also, and the role of the teacher will be to help students define their own essence by exploring themselves, and teacher would be exposing the students to various paths they may take in life and creating an environment in which they may freely choose their own preferred way. So friends, on this note, I, Dr. Renu Tomar, is signing off with a promise to join you back again in the next lecture talking about a different topic. Namaskar, thanks a lot and very good afternoon.